Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful and historic neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Please be sure to subscribe to our show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. We're celebrating the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with a conversation with our friend Nic Stone about our brand new middle grade novel, Clean Getaway. Before we invite Nick in, we want to let you know that the Reading with Your Kids podcast is coming back to Chicago. That's right, we'll be part of Kids Expo in Chicagoland, February 8th and 9th at the Schaumburg Convention Center, Schaumburg, Illinois. We are so very, very excited to be part of this amazing event. We are going to be creating a totally interactive experience that will let you and your kids know what it's like to be a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And we may just use some of that content we're creating in a future episode of the show. Imagine that. You could be a guest on the show. We'll also be presenting my totally interactive magic show. You can make magic happen on stage. It's happening at the Schaumburg Convention Center, Schaumburg, Illinois, February 8th and 9th. It's the Reading with Your Kids podcast at Kids Expo. Joining us right now from the beautiful city of Atlanta in Georgia. She is returning to the podcast. She was here before to talk about her best-selling novel, Dear Martin. Please welcome back Nic Stone. Nic, how are you?
Hello. I am alive. I got in from Los Angeles at like 5 o'clock this morning and have not slept, but that's okay.
Oh, you do?
Yay.
My son and my daughter-in-law, they do that stuff. It's all the time. It's like they're on vacation and they take the last flight out of wherever it is they are, and they get in back to Boston at 2, 3 in the morning, just in time to go to work at 8.
Yeah, and then we regret it. Deeply, deeply regret it.
Yeah, but they're too young to learn from it now. I certainly have gotten over that myself. I like to come home 2 or 3 days early, but anyways, we're here talking about Clean Getaway, Nic's brand new middle grade book, and I have to tell you, I don't get a chance to read all the books that we talk about here in the show, but I am in the middle of reading Clean Getaway and really love it. It's fascinating and challenging. Tell us, give us the kind of elevator pitch about the book.
So Clean Getaway follows an 11-year-old African-American boy on a road trip across the American South with his white grandmother. And as they go along this journey, he learns that it's a trip she tried to take with her African-American husband in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And that the world, though it's a little different than when she tried to take the trip the first time, there's still some things that he recognizes in his own life. Mm-hmm. And as they go, he learns not only about the history and how history affects the present, but he's also learning some things about his grandmother that he didn't know.
Mm. You know, one of the things that I love about the book, and I think it's the reason that it's drawing me in so much, is the fact that I had a very similar relationship with my grandmother. Especially when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. She was my best buddy. And we did a lot of great things together. And I found out a lot about her that the rest of the family didn't really know about, and how she enjoyed going to speakeasies and riding motorcycles and things like that.
Yeah. I find that talking to my grandmother now, my grandmother is 85, and just getting to sit down and talk to her and hear her stories has been amazing. It's such a valuable thing that I feel like gets lost a bit sometimes in our very fast-paced world. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to kind of highlight how special that particular relationship is and how powerful it is to have these kind of intergenerational experiences.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I really feel bad about. I had this great relationship with my grandmother and my grandfather, and, I'm really aware of a lot of the things that were part of their life, their music, and, I know a lot of the movies, and there are a lot of names of people that weren't alive when I was alive, but I heard about them, and I don't think that happens as much these days.
Agreed. I'm glad that I still have my grandmother around and that I have the opportunity. And it's not just like the popular culture stuff. There's just so much history, and life was so different for her than it has been for me. And hearing these things, it really makes me appreciate kind of what I have in a way. Yeah.
I think there was a comedian talking about, he was just commenting on, there are some young people saying that this is the worst time in the history of humankind to be alive. And he just kind of joked about, the bubonic plague was kind of tough too. And, just kind of reminding us that, life is really different in even just, 2 generations ago, life expectancy was shorter. It was dangerous for more dangerous than it is today for a lot of people. Things really have changed in some ways. But as you said, there are a lot of things that still need to change in the future.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, but I think that'll always be the case, right? It's like the more research I do and the more I learn about the history of the world, the history of the United States, the history of, humans interacting with other humans, the more I realize that, like, as we solve problem A, problem B is going to come to the surface, and then we'll solve problem B, and problem C will come to the surface. And these things, I don't know, it's interesting, like, when I think about kind of the collision of nature and nurture, I guess, like biology and conditioning, and just this idea of human beings as a competitive species in the animal kingdom, and how that, like, manifests in the way that we interact with each other. So it's been quite a journey. Like, I've written about racism, I've written about homophobia, I've written about economic inequality, and now I'm kind of like going back to racism from a different angle. And it's like every book that I write, I find that people just can be kind of trash to each other. And the way to combat that is through empathy and trying to, like, be aware of the way that we think and the way that we interact with other people and why.
Yeah. One of the things that is a big part of the book, Clean Getaway, is the Green Book. Can you talk a little bit about that for folks who aren't familiar with it?
Yes. So the Traveler's Green Book was this little literal green booklet that was filled with lists for each state. And there were even, like, some countries in there, but under each state, you could find a list of all of the places, lodging, restaurants, gas stations even, where it was safe for African Americans to travel and to visit. So, for instance, say you're, a Black family, it's 1961, you want to go from your home in Atlanta to Jackson, Mississippi. Where are the places you can stop along the way if you need food? Where are the places you can find lodging if you don't want to be caught in what was called a sundown town? So basically, like, there were towns during this time frame where if you were African American and you were caught in that town after sundown, it was over for you. Like no questions asked. So having this little guide was so helpful to so many African American families who didn't want to be just kind of like scared and bound at home. So interestingly enough, in the book, this is a book in the possession of, it's a white lady who has this book, but it's because she was married to a Black man, in the 60s. But what you come to discover, and this isn't exactly a spoiler, is that the book wasn't like, it was helpful, but there were even points where what was in the book wasn't helpful to them as an interracial couple. Mm-hmm. So it's a real interesting little piece of history that I think more people should know about. I'm glad that like more kids are about to start learning about it. Mm-hmm. And there's like a reprint edition that you can like get off of Amazon. I don't know. I've never seen it carried in a bookstore, but I'm sure I can probably convince some independent bookstores to order a few now, I hope. Mm-hmm. But because it's just a really cool thing to have and to hold and to look at.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing to have and to look at. It's really disturbing to me to know that was a necessity for a lot of people in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. You know, we're not talking about ancient history. We're talking, less than 50. My math isn't very good.
Yeah, it's like 50 years ago, 51 years ago.
And again, as you said, there's racism, and then there's that, the prejudice against, this interracial couple at that time, that's mm-hmm. still going on. And, it's just, it's heartbreaking that we haven't been able,
agree.
It's heartbreaking that here we are, we're talking about AI and flying cars and autonomous trucks, and this stuff is this, unwarranted, unexplained hatred and fear of the other is still exists in our hearts.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing to root out. And I this is why I will continue to write books that deal with the topic of race and that take kind of a searing look at the manifestations of systemic racism, because honestly, for a lot of people, it's just these thoughts and these ideas that you grow up thinking and not even realizing that you think them, or not realizing you believe them until you find yourself in a situation where something unpleasant comes out, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely feel it's like a part of my mission, if you will, to continue to draw attention to some of the ugly stuff that a lot of people just don't want to address because it makes us uncomfortable. But like, in discomfort is where change happens. Like, nobody ever changed because they were comfortable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, parents encouraging their kids to step outside their comfort zone, to kind of challenge themselves. But I think usually when we're talking about that, we're talking about encouraging our kids to try something new, to, go beyond, what they're comfortable doing. And we have to realize that as parents, we need to step outside our comfort zone sometimes and have these kind of conversations with our kids and also with each other so we can all grow.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely this inclination, and I say this as a parent. I have 2 kids. There's this inclination to want to kind of like protect, in quotes, protect your children from like the ugliness of the world, but like that doesn't actually help them is what I've discovered. And in trying to prevent kids from taking a head-on look at things like racism and police brutality and homophobia and all of these ways that people hurt other people, and trying to prevent kids from looking at that, we are actually doing them a disservice, because I feel like the best way to prepare your child for the world that they would face is to help them to face the world, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. Like while I have you here in my house, I have the opportunity to be this guiding light, if you will, and I have this opportunity to help my kids navigate these spaces so that when they find themselves in a situation where things aren't really hunky-dory, they know what to do, or they know how to, if they don't know what to do, they know that they can come ask me about it. Mm-hmm. And as much as I would love to just, there's this idea of innocence that I don't think is actual innocence. It's more like insulation. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that it's actually helpful.
I don't think it's helpful at all. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't talk about in my home when I was a kid. I think I was I think I was probably 15 or 16. No, I know I was 16 years old the first time I went to a funeral. It was my grandfather. And it was really, and there were people who, in our lives that died. There were people who, in my life committed suicide. There was a neighbor who was the same age as me drowned. And, those conversations, we're not talking about that. It's done. And, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the reality.
It doesn't. Right. Cause then you have all of these questions and what are you going to do with them? How do you deal with this kind of stuff, especially when it continues to happen? Mm-hmm. And it was a struggle for me growing up as well, and having these microaggressions is what we call them in like race theory. It's basically these racist ideas that come out of people's mouths without said person realizing that what they've just said or done is racist. Mm-hmm. And being on the receiving end of those and not knowing what to do with them or about them, or even if like what I was feeling was accurate, mm-hmm. was really stressful. So what I'm trying to do in Clean Getaway is what I do in Dear Martin, which is like validate those moments where like you feel like you're a kid of color and something is off about the way this teacher is treating you, and something is off about it, but you can't exactly pinpoint what it is. Mm-hmm. Like putting that moment in a book where another kid can read it and can identify with it just validates that kid's experiences, which is a really important thing to me as a writer.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, here in the Reading with Your Kids podcast, we really encourage families to read together, or if not snuggled up. I can't imagine a family snuggled up on a couch reading Clean Getaway out loud to each other, although it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a book you should co-read together, because it can be the starting point for some great conversations. One of the paragraphs that really, just grabbed me by the collar and shook me, and I think would be a super starting place for a conversation, is early in the book when Scoob's dad is talking to him and says, when boys like you, he pointed to the brown back of Scoob's hand, hit boys like him, he opened his own hand and pointed to his pale palm. The punishment is harsher and the fallout is infinitely worse, William. And I think that no matter where you are on the racial or cultural spectrum, that's a great place to start a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I hope. I think that like these are difficult conversations to have, largely because we don't want to admit the fact that like racism is still a thing. Nobody wants the ugly things to still be a part of our reality. But that just makes them that much more important. It makes the conversations that much more important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I have to.
I don't even remember writing that, so I'm glad you just reminded me. I'm sitting here like, oh, that's pretty clever.
Like, I did really good there. That was
All right.
Well, I have to share with you I was before I started doing educational magic shows and leading into podcasts, I was in the social service field, and I was a social worker working in the juvenile justice system. And one of the jobs I had was at a secure, it wasn't really detention center because it was very small. It was for a very small number of young women. But we had a very mixed staff racially. And there was some tensions, and I remember one day, they said, we're gonna have a conversation about race. And, I was this young white guy. I was I think it was right 1980 or so. And they just went around the room, and all of my white colleagues sat there going, nope, I've never had a racial thought in my life. Nope. And they came to me and I go, well, I got to tell you, I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, and I had a black friend in middle school, and we were really cool. But I goes, I probably am racist in some ways. I don't want to be, but I kind of grew up with that stuff. And oh man, I got hammered. And
yeah.
But it was to her credit, one of my colleagues who's African American stood up and she said, why are you doing this? He's being honest, and we know him, and he's cool, and he's treats us fairly, and he's just being honest, and we can't have this conversation unless we're honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so fascinating, right? Like, there are certain terms and markers that people just, it's like the wall goes up, right? Like, you use the term racist and it's like an instant loss of a person's attention. Mm-hmm. So rhetoric is super important when we're talking about this stuff. Mm-hmm. Cloaking, like starting with the idea and then putting the racist label on it, as opposed to saying, like, you're a racist because ABC. It's like, well, if you think about these certain things in a certain way, you might want to re-examine mm-hmm. why you feel that way. Like, I find that with the topic of racism, especially when you're talking to young kids about it, because honestly, most kids, they literally just see color. That's it. Like, they see, like, oh, Tyrone is brown mm-hmm. and Mary Sue is pink, is what my kid used to say. He would say that the white kids were pink and the brown kids were brown. And there was, like, the light brown kids and there were, like, the medium brown kids. And everybody was just what color, literal color that they were. Mm-hmm. But even that is an opportunity. And there is definitely some fear about, like I was saying earlier, there's this fear about, like, taking your child's innocence by introducing them to these kind of heavier topics at a young age. But honestly, that's the best time to do it. The first time I took my kids, let's see, my son was 4. The first time I took him to the King Center mm-hmm. on MLK Day. And we got on a bus because they always park a bus outside of the Dr. King's birth home. Mm-hmm. We get on the bus and he tried to sit down and I made him go to the back. And it just was this perfect opportunity for me to talk about being brown and mm-hmm. how being brown would have affected his life if he had been born in a different time. And he got it. Like, it was a thing that clicked for him to the point where when we came back out of the house and I asked if he wanted to get back on the bus and sit in the front, he said no. Which was a huge deal because my kid loves being on buses and trains. Mm-hmm. So, and it didn't ruin anything. Like, he isn't, like, ruined for life or, like, jaded forever because he now knows that if he had existed in a different time, he wouldn't have been able to sit where he wanted to on a bus. Mm-hmm. It's just a fact mm-hmm. that he has now tucked into his memory. And I think that, like, there will come a point where he will need to be reminded of, like, his own power because he is going to face overt racism. I have no doubt that my boys are going to face overt racism. I wish I had a doubt about it. But, if we're almost 52 years post Dr. King's assassination and we're still having these conversations, like, 3 or 4 years from now when my kid is 10 years old, like, how far will we really have come? Mm-hmm. So helping them to see the problem, but also teaching them that, like, they aren't what these ideas say they are, I think is super important. Mm-hmm. So it's like me unpacking racism with my kids, and then I get to, like, help unpack it for kids who aren't African American, for kids who are white even. Mm-hmm. There's something to be said for unpacking this concept of racism and showing how kind of frivolous it is at, like, an idea level, mm-hmm.
That I think will be really good for, like, the future. Absolutely. The other thing about Clean Getaway is that you absolutely address the issue of racism, but you also address the issue of family. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, and again, it's something that really kind of jumped out and grabbed me. There's, I believe it's grandma saying, anywho, finding out these things about my father at such a young age, well, let's just say that there's a whole lot of things I wish I could unlearn. It put a lot of mad down inside my belly, just mm-hmm. like it did your dad, and just like your dad puts a whole lot of mad inside of you. And so it's, Clean Getaway also talks about, family relationships, and that we're not always nice to each other in families. We don't always think about our words.
Yeah. Even when we have the best intentions,
mm-hmm.
mm-hmm. so much. And that's of course, this is something that, like, I don't know that, like, a 12-year-old is going to pick up on it, but, like, the idea of intergenerational trauma mm-hmm. is a thing that's addressed in Clean Getaway, where you have this traumatic thing that then creates behavior that causes trauma for the next generation, which then that trauma cycles over and creates new trauma for the next generation. And it's complicated and messy, and it involves a lot of like deep work, like soul work to stop that cycle from continuing. But I think that Scoob really does get to a place, I won't spoil anything, of course, but I really do think he gets to a place that neither his father nor his grandmother do. Like, he gets to a place where he has a better grip on the world around him and where he understands things better even than the adults in the book, which is a really important thing to me. Like, it's really important for me to point out that, like, honestly, the 8 to 12-year-olds, they're the people who understand the most if you give them the opportunity. And I think that they're also able to process and integrate a lot of the things that they learn better than when you're like 30 or 40 and you're learning about this stuff and you're kind of set in the way that you think and you are fully convinced that A is true and B is false and there's no such thing as C. But when you're like 11 or 12, all of that stuff is still fluid.
Sure.
So it's a really great time to be discussing these quote unquote tougher topics, especially the ones that have to do with family.
Yeah. And yeah, when you're 30 years old, it's not just, well, is A true? Is B true? It's like, well, if A true, then that means that my life has to change dramatically.
Yep.
And that's scary. And I maybe don't want to do that. And it's a lot less complicated for 11 and 12-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where did writing Clean Getaway bring you in your life?
I haven't figured it out yet. I guess we'll see tomorrow when it comes out. I'm still trying to figure out how to talk about it. This is my third time talking about it in a pretty public way. The first time was this morning at 8:30. So I haven't exactly figured out where it's I feel like I'm at the start of the journey. Writing it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoy the middle grade space. So I will definitely continue to write in that space, but I am interested to see what the reception is like and how people either take or don't take to the book. It's different writing middle grade than YA because I know that I have to appeal more to adults. Not the book itself, of course, needs to appeal to the target audience, which is 8 to 12-year-olds. But I also know that there has to be some kind of adult something because those are the people who are I'm not trying to appeal directly to 8 to 12-year-olds. You can't market to 8 to 12-year-olds. You're marketing to parents really.
Yep.
And teachers. So navigating that kind of funky space has been real interesting. But yeah, like I said, we'll see how it goes. I start doing more middle school visits and some elementary schools. And I'm okay, this is new territory for me. We will see how it goes.
Well,
we'll see how it goes.
I can definitely relate to you on that. Doing my educational magic shows, I can go into an elementary school and I can rock those kids for an hour and a half. But if I'm not making the teachers happy, I'm not going to get back there. I'm not going to be invited back. So yeah, I understand the kind of marketing.
It's interesting, right?
Very, very interesting. Well, we've had such a great time. I definitely want to encourage folks to go out there. The adults that are listening to this show, definitely go out there and check out Clean Getaway. I think it is a fantastic, it's a fun read. It's a fun read that you're going to enjoy reading. Your kids are going to enjoy reading it. But it's also something that can really start some wonderful conversations that can help you and your kids grow closer together and help your kids navigate the world in a better way, I think. Nic, remind everybody where they can connect with you online, please.
So on Instagram, I am at Nic Stone. There's no K, so NICSTONE. And on Twitter, I am at GET Nicked, NICCED.
All right, we've been talking to the author of Clean Getaway, a brand new middle grade novel by our friend Nic Stone. Nic, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Tiffany Teachy. She'll be here to talk to us about her STEM-related book, What Can I Be? That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Are you the author of a great children's book? Doesn't matter if it's a board book, a picture book, a middle grade novel, YA title. We would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. Hey, the next easy step for me is to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Thank you so much to our friend Nic Stone. Be sure to check out Clean Getaway. It is a fantastic read. I want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan. She is amazing. Please be sure to check out the blog. She creates a blog for every episode, and they're wonderful. You can find it at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support that she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. And most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.